Join me today as I work on this big piece of poppy flowers. I have already sketched out the composition on this large canvas with pencil first, and then I went over that with a mix of black and dark blue paint. Then I coated the whole canvas with alizarin crimson, which is a transparent color made by Nova, and a mixture of Liquitex matte medium to make the surface more matte and less glossy, so it's easier to paint on top of it. I have not decided on my exact colors for the painting yet, so that is to be worked out as I get going on the piece. I think the poppies will be red, maybe orange, but the rest of the stems and grasses, as far as the color scheme, I'm gonna have to work it out as I'm painting it and just kind of do a trial and error method to see what fits. My goal for the background, for the negative space in this piece, is to be very light. So the space in between the stems is going to be lighter, perhaps maybe even white, we'll have to see. But of course, sometimes plans change as the painting evolves, and my goals with the background color may change too. I also have not specifically decided what plant each section of the painting is going to be. Some of these are sketched out in a little bit of an abstract manner, just to give myself room to play as I'm painting. Sometimes the composition kind of takes its own shape as I'm working on the painting, especially with the flowers and grasses, the organic subjects. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix some paint and get started on this, and I hope that you will come along. So I start my painting by filling in darker objects. I use a mixture of blues and yellows here to create very deep greens. I start to highlight the leaves to give me a little bit of variation against orange underpainting. Now I'm gonna mix up some darker red tones to get working on my poppies. The color for now almost matches the background, so it doesn't stand out too much, but it starts to give me some definition. Now I'm adding some purple to my paint mixture to fill in the shadows of the poppy flowers, which is starting to give me better value contrast against the underpainting. And here's ultramarine blue, fluorescent magenta, and some white to create a mixture of vibrant violets for some other plants in my painting. They're looking really good against that background and are starting to allow me to feel that color contrast. And this portion of the plants is going to be muted yellow, consisting of Indian yellow, raw sienna, and white. Here are a few dabs to get my yellow plants started. Now I want to have a few neutrals on my palette as I continue to work on the stems and start to build out that background. The negative space between all the stems and flowers in my painting is going to be lighter to help me define my objects for that strong value contrast. I use what's called a value priority system in my work. Here, adding some ultramarine blue is an optional color to dip into with my lighter tones. Now that all my darker areas have been defined, this negative space painting process becomes like a coloring book. Now I can actually relax and have more fun and not think too hard. And when it's easier for your hand to move in a different direction, go ahead and flip that canvas over. These cool tones against the warm underpainting are creating what's called a color vibration. So it's fun to leave a few tiny holes of the underpainting showing to retain that vibrational element in my finished work. And back to upright canvas. For the sky, I actually had no plan, so I took a bunch of neutrals as well as cooler vibrant tones that were left on my palette and used a smaller brush to start assembling a mosaic of something. Let's just see where it goes. A lot of my skies are actually a trial and error process. I play around with dabs of paint until I end up liking the layering and the composition. You have to allow yourself that kind of freedom outside of the structure of your drawing. I certainly like painting skies with texture and very rarely make them a solid blue.
Back to the negative space behind the plants, but now I'm enhancing it with lighter highlights. With acrylics, first layer of paint can leave your piece looking kind of flat, and that's where a lot of people start to get discouraged. But then, when you add additional layers, little by little, your painting becomes alive, and that's where the magic is. Now I'm adding some dark tones to the center of my poppy flowers. Did you know that poppy's circular center is called stigma? I didn't know that before I started painting poppies. And back to the definition of red petals, adding darker tones here before I get started on the highlights. When I add definition to the objects of my painting, I tend to jump around the whole piece instead of focusing on only one section. I like to treat my art kind of like a developing photograph, that way I can see how it's coming together as a whole. For the highlights, I use similar color mixes as I created before, only with more white. Now the brightest part of the petals. Here I'm using crimson red with some orange, and it's starting to give me that vivid poppy flower. And fluorescent magenta plus orange will allow me to make certain sections even brighter. Back to developing photographs. Sometimes the foreground objects get lost a little as the negative space is being filled, so I like to go over them and redefine them and also give them extra light. In the third layer of my negative space, I am using even more white and adding a little bit of that grassy texture. Back to sky, of course, it needs to be highlighted. It was coming out pretty, but it was looking a little stormy. So now I'm using warmer tones with raw sienna and some Indian yellow added in to give it a brighter area of the horizon. And here I'm just dabbing my brush into pinks, violets, blues, neutrals that are remaining on my palette, but only with more white to continue developing that lighter sky. This hill is at a distance, so it needed to be lightened up as well. Back to the stems and leaves. I'm adding in more definition here using cool green and warm green. But actually, none of my greens come out of a tube. I mixed them from blues and yellows. That way they stay calm relative to the rest of my painting and don't overpower my piece. Because it's very easy to overwhelm your painting with toxic green. More orange highlights on the edges of petals are bringing my poppies forward. the palette, I even added a little bit of red to my green mixture to keep it calm and harmonious with the rest of the piece. And then of course more highlights to define the very poppy center. The sky has transformed itself to have a warmer appearance now, that is to offset it from the bottom part of the background, the negative space with the grass and hill, which has cooler tones. Now adding the final touch-ups, and the color plan came out as I expected, which is mostly light and pastel tones against vivid, striking oranges and reds and darker stems. Here's the result. A video camera is not always the greatest at showing painting's physical texture, but hopefully this close-up will give you an idea.
The painting is all done and framed, and I'm quite happy with it. And varnished, which means very shiny. And as this new poppy piece hangs on a wall and then gets displayed at art shows, I really do appreciate you dropping by to watch the process of its creation. And if you do like this type of content, I have the next video for you to check out below. Or here, or here. It's floating around somewhere. Click on the link to watch the next video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you there.